This is a light gun. Now, I'm not 100% clear how the technology works, but I'm pretty sure it shoots invisible lasers into your TV or arcade monitor. These were a 90s mainstay. Nowadays, if you walk into an arcade, you'll see something like this, usually with a Raw Thrills logo on the side, which is basically an updated version of how the old Terminator 2 cabinet worked, whereupon a plastic gun dragged a cursor across the screen. Now, Terminator 2 was released way back in 1991 by Midway, and goddamn, I can't seem to escape Midway, but it wasn't until 1994 where Virtua Cop blasted into arcades and really cemented light guns working within 3D polygonal worlds. It was basically the Street Fighter II of light gun games, ushering in Namco's Time Crisis series and Sega's own House of the Dead. During all of this, one company was kind of lost in the shuffle, that being Atari. While Sega, Namco, and Midway were vying for domination in a war exclusively fought with tethered plastic guns, Atari was barely hanging on, as it had gone without a big hit for several years, especially since the voracious Jaguar was setting itself up for failure. Not content to let their rivals shoot it out for arcade supremacy, Atari decided to commission their own light gun game, and quick, as they also happened to be bleeding talent from all corners, with many of their employees leaving the sinking ship of the former video game giant. This prototype light gun game was known as Bounty Hunter, but its lead designer, ironically enough, left for Electronic Arts in mid-development, God bless him. Atari then sought out Logic, an outside third party, to try and salvage the game, but instead of continuing it, they decided to start over from scratch with Area 51. An alien outbreak occurs in the infamous top-secret military base located 90 miles outside of Las Vegas, with the soldiers on site being genetically turned into mutants/zombies/dorks in brightly colored jumpsuits. Also, there's a nuclear threat at the core of the base as well, to spice things up. So it's up to the elite task force known as STAR. STAR, the Special Tactical Advanced Alien Response, and their two main members, Lieutenant Stephanie Savage Snow Grant and Sergeant Major Marcus Thunderstrike Bradley, to lead their squad into the heavily quarantined base against the alien threat. The aliens, of course, being the Crons. Taking the basic, tried and true formula of having a player kill scores and scores of mutants and aliens, Area 51 combines several graphical techniques that, while not as timeless as, say, House of the Dead or Virtua Cop, still wowed arcade goers with a flashy 90s sheen. Now, what you have here is a pre-rendered movie reel of backgrounds. Woof, eat your heart out, Reboot Season 1. That simply play in an animated sequence once you've cleared each room of any and all threats. These environments have some interactive elements, like barrels, windows, crates, and the like. Then there's the cast of enemies, and when I say cast, I mean like the two of them. There's the multicolored members of Slipknot, gross zombie-like men in boiler suits who are brought to life through the magic of stop-motion animation. Yes, much like Primal Rage, Mortal Kombat bosses, or Ray Harryhausen productions, someone had to painstakingly move small malleable puppets and record each frame of movement. That's a good reason why there's only two enemy types, with the last one being the Crons. In contrast with the enemies, Logic opted for digitizing suited actors to make up the bulk of STAR. These jobbers take the place of random hostages that usually run into the line of fire. Every time you blast one, it's 1 point of health gone, as is tradition. If you decide not to shoot any enemies but happen to want to kill your coworkers, you'll unlock Cron Hunter mode, which lets you play as an alien, complete with absolutely eye-melting predator vision. As you blast through each level, you'll occasionally find power-ups that'll increase your spread in a shotgun-like way, and you can then further upgrade that by getting an automatic firing ability. Amongst all the carnage, mayhem, and exploding barrels, you can also unlock secret rooms that are filled with even more 90s stuff. Area 51 was a massive hit when it released in '95, as its combination of 3D backgrounds, mutants, and alien conspiracy subject matter was a potent mix in that day and age.
Which was the style at the time.
And Atari got the hit it wanted, so it did the next logical thing, ported it to several consoles, which made a case for why light gun shooters barely work outside an arcade. The ports span the PlayStation, the Sega Saturn, and Microsoft Windows 95. And by this time, Atari's arcade division had been bought by Midway, so these ports were ported with a very nice Midway logo right on the cover. Reviewers, though, were not exactly kind to it, with mediocre to poor critical reception, as it was a super raw port with no extra features, therefore limited replayability, especially since the game could be completed in less than 20 minutes. Regardless of the reviews of the home version, Area 51 was a big enough hit for Atari to greenlight a sequel, Area 51 Site 4, which was released in 1998. This was a defining year for video games, but more in the console space rather than the arcades, and light gun shooters were rapidly flexing their graphical prowess, with fully 3D entries like House of the Dead 2. Atari, however, stuck to their plastic guns, as Site 4 didn't deviate too much from its predecessor, especially from a visual standpoint. This aversion to polygons was also shared by Midway, since Cron Evil was also released in '98 and used the same FMV-style computer-generated backgrounds. And clowns, lots of clowns. Site 4, though, was an improved sequel, although it was kind of incremental at best. The backgrounds did look sharper and there was slightly more variety in how missions played out, but the game was largely the same, therefore it saw significantly less success in arcades, and remains a pretty rare cabinet. In no real shock to anyone considering the reception of the ports of the first game, Site 4 was never re-released to any home consoles. The home, however, is where the series would eventually turn to, as Midway itself pivoted away from the dying business of arcades in the early 2000s. They decided to focus more on bigger productions exclusively designed for consoles, with some being very new and risky, and some relying on the names of arcade hits of yesteryear. Thus came Area 51. Again. But this time, Midway smartly decided to upgrade the franchise to a traditional first-person shooter, grabbing influence from just about everywhere they could, other video games, TV and movies, and even popular music. Developed by Midway Studios Austin, Mesologic having closed shortly after Site 4, Area 51 2005 was a reboot of sorts, released on the Xbox, PS2, and Windows, as Midway had stopped supporting the GameCube by this point, much like many third parties. The player controls the most first-person shooter-named protagonist ever, Ethan Cole, a member of a hazmat team sent to clear out Area 51 from a spreading mutagenic virus. Upon arriving, shit starts to get out of this world as Mr. Cole runs into a friendly alien named Edgar, voiced by Marilyn Manson. Yes, this is a thing that happened. Not to be outdone, Ethan Cole himself is brought to life, in inverted commas, by David Duchovny, the world's most accomplished acting robot.
Nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to encounter.
Well, I love me some Fox Mulder. I don't think hiring Duchovny to do voice work in your video game ever really pays dividends. Certainly didn't for 13. Regardless, Area 51 2005 plays out like many FPSs of the day, but with its tongue firmly planted in its cheek, never taking itself too seriously. It also gives off a very Perfect Dark style vibe, but through the over-the-top American action movie lens rather than James Bond. In fact, much like Perfect Dark, the player can wield both human and alien weaponry and can even scan the environment via a bit of fancy tech for clues/info, similar to Metroid Prime. To top it all off, Ethan Cole even gains the ability to transform into a mutant form, spoilers, because he gets infected by the virus. This does exactly what you'd think, increases your damage, your health, etc., but sadly doesn't increase the quality of Duchovny's performance.
When I was first assigned to Hazmat Team Bravo, I thought Ramirez was the kind of by-the-book military who resented babysitting a team of lab rats.
The voice cast is rounded out by the late Powers Booth, Nolan North, and the guy who played Elaine's boss. And overall, the level of production definitely helps prop up the game's reputation, especially coming from its simplistic arcade roots. However, Midway had a thing for spending money on voice actors and big Hollywood-style glitz at this time, and it wasn't necessarily the best use of their money. In conjunction with the game, they also brokered a deal with Paramount to spin the game off into its own feature film, which, after a quick IMDb searchy, I can confirm never actually happened, except for that shitty unrelated found footage movie. Now, this might be a familiar scenario for some, especially if you know anything about Midway, as it closely parallels the same thing that happened, or didn't happen, to Spy Hunter and its failed movie. Regardless, the game version of that film still came out in 2006, with Rock the Dwayne Johnson's Nowhere to Run. Area 51 2005 garnered above average reviews, and while enjoyable enough for its wacky plot and solid mechanics, it didn't exactly stand out from the glut of other FPSs released in the mid-2000s. Still though, Midway's gamble paid off enough for them to greenlight one more game in the series. Black Site, Area 51, never a good sign when the original name is downgraded to a subtitle, was again developed by Midway Studios Austin, but this time they picked up an important hire, one Harvey Smith of Ion Storm. Obviously inspired by the many military and sci-fi shooters that were cropping up, Black Site had a decidedly more dusty, low-saturated look, and took itself about 1,000 times more seriously than any game before it. All the notable voice actors are gone, and the game seems to be another reboot, I think. It doesn't pick up on the last game's story threads, so your guess is as good as mine. Our new hero is Captain Aaron Pierce, head of the memorable, Delta Force Echo crew. Who does said crew consist of? Well, that would be Logan Summers, Cody Grayson, and Mitchell Ambrose. Man, I miss Star. Now, it's pretty clear that Area 51 2005 used Halo as a template for its visuals, but Black Site goes even further, particularly with the gameplay, regenerating health, 2-weapon limit, controllable vehicles, all of the Halos. The only kind of unique but not really facet to the gameplay was a squad system where you could give basic commands to your bros, and that's about it. There was a morale feature where your AI teammates would fight better and live longer depending on how each skirmish turned out, so if you suck and take a lot of damage, then your teammates will suck, but if you do well and kick ass, then they'll do well and kick ass, I guess. The plot centered around another government conspiracy to utilize alien DNA to mutate soldiers into super soldiers, but as you might expect, things went somewhat awry, hence why Aaron Pierce's crew was sent to clean up. There's betrayals, reveals, and just about everything you can see coming a mile away, lacking much of the charm of the previous games. While certainly functional, the game felt underbaked and a bit rushed, and like we've already seen, it's hard to remember even when you're playing it, or at least looking at footage. With that in mind, Harvey Smith did himself no favors after Black Site was released to less than stellar reviews. Now, when this happened in 2007, Midway was on the proverbial last legs, as they were on their way to filing for bankruptcy. Maybe knowing this, Harvey Smith stated at a game conference which was held in Montreal, rather colorfully, "That project was so fucked up. I wasn't particularly interested in the IP, and it took 8 months to get one thing working. With a year to go, the game was disastrously off rails. It went straight from alpha to final." Smith was fired from his position within Midway shortly after these comments made their way online. In the end though, I don't think he really cared. Upon his firing, he joined Arcane Studios and went on to head up Dishonored. Now, going back to the originals, Area 51 was a big enough hit in its own right that it led to a completely other separate game from Mesologic, the awesomely named Maximum Force, which was sometimes sold in a dual setup with Area 51 as an option for arcade owners. Ditching the alien motif for a more harder-edged SWAT team aesthetic, it once again used the FMV backgrounds to great effect. While both series quickly aged out due to the competition from Sega and Namco, things have a habit of returning. So, almost 10 years later, Raw Thrills pretty much used the exact same technology with 2004's Target Terror, just slightly more higher res and taking advantage of where post 9/11 America's head was at. It was almost a parody of the 90s arcade game, digitized actors, silly minigames, and wanton death and destruction. It is available now in store shelves for the Nintendo Wii. Now, looking to the future, it's unclear if the rights to Area 51 died with Midway, or if, much like their other IPs, are lying unused in the Warner Brothers vaults. Would they ever license it out to Raw Thrills? Bring it back as an FPS? Or shit, maybe even slap together a mobile game where you gotta tap a bunch to send waves of idiots Naruto running into a top secret military base? The possibilities are simply endless, and no one knows for sure how or when the series might return.
No one has been able to see the whole picture.
Know of any other franchises I could take a retrospective look at? Let me know in the comments below, or hit up the Flophouse VIP Patreon to officially nominate a series of your choosing. And thanks to Big Boss member Nsoft for suggesting Area 51.